In 2016, I had the opportunity to travel to Senegal. I was traveling with a group of about 10 performance artists, and my daughter, who was a teenager at the time, was able to go with me. The week that we were leaving, I logged into Facebook, and I witnessed the murder of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling. Philando Castile's girlfriend had went live during this altercation. She was driving, and he was in the passenger seat. He had on a white t-shirt, and you could see the blood pooling across his shirt. And she was screaming, "I know you didn't kill him." And her little daughter was in the back seat, and she was saying, "Mommy, it's gonna be okay." And the day before that, Alton Sterling was shot in the chest and killed by the police, and someone had recorded it and put that on Facebook too. So I also witnessed the murder of Alton Sterling. And I was so ready to just get out of here. And I'm a writer, and I write about race and tough topics all the time, but I just didn't have any words. And people would ask me, "Hannah, what do you have to say about this?" And I didn't have anything to say to them. I was just ready to get out of here, and I just needed a minute to breathe. When I got off of the plane in Senegal, I finally felt like I was at home. I finally felt there was a place in this world where being Black wasn't a crime. My friend Cynthia and I went to the store to buy earrings, and we were holding the earrings in such a way that the shop owner wouldn't think that we were stealing. And when we went to buy them, we realized the shop owner was outside of the shop. And it dawned on us that here in Senegal, just being Black isn't a crime. And finally, it was like the world opened up to me and said, "Hannah, we've been waiting for you." And I decided for the rest of my time in Senegal, I was going to enjoy every minute of it. But there was one part that I knew would be extremely challenging, and we were going to Gorée Island. And it's where there is the House of Slaves and the door of no return. And you have to take a boat to get to Gorée Island, and while we were on the boat, the mood was so somber, you could hear a pin drop. And we could see Gorée Island off in the distance. And when we got off the boat and walked into Gorée Island, we immediately saw the different rooms for everyone. They had rooms for women and young girls, infants, men, and a room up underneath the stairs for people that would resist. And I went inside of the room for women, and I looked out the window, and when I say window, it was just about 2 inches wide. And my daughter went in the room for young girls, and I will never forget, she started weeping and crying, and her cries filled up the space of this slave castle and echoed everywhere. And I started to make my way to the door of no return. And this is the last point where Black people would be before they were put on slave ships and brought to America. And I stood in the door of no return, and I could hear her crying. And I tried to imagine what it would be like if I had to leave her and get on a ship and not know where I was going. When we came back to America, I was so extremely depressed. While Gorée Island was indeed difficult, I did just have a minute to breathe. And I knew when I got back to America, I was back to being the other person, and back to being profiled, and back to being scared when I drove, and back to my skin feeling so heavy. And I called my mom, and I told her, "Mom, I was there for 2 weeks, And I had 20,160 seconds just to be free. And my mom and I started talking about slavery and the slave ships and the South. And we started talking about picking cotton. And so nonchalantly, my mom said, well, Hannah, you know, when I was a little girl, I used to pick cotton. And my mother is 70 years old, and she has never told me this story. And I was so dumbfounded. These are things that you read about in books, but you don't imagine that this is something that your own mother has done. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, well, from the time I was 9 until I was 12, my grandmother would come pick us up, my brothers and sisters, and we would go pick cotton for 80 cents a day. And I asked her, please tell me about it. And she told me about pulling the cotton plants out of the ground. And she told me about picking cotton, and her fingernails would bleed. And I asked her, well, can you tell me about your grandmother? What was her name? And she said, I don't remember. We just called her Mamie. And I said, do you remember anyone beyond your grandmother? And she said, no. And I said, well, what happened in the cotton fields? And she said, I won't repeat the names that they called me. And she's never spoken of it again. So I knew that I was going to have to make my way to the cotton fields. I had to see it. And as life would have it, my job said, Hannah, we're going to send you to Mississippi. And I thought, nah, y'all not sending me to Mississippi. To be honest, I was scared to go to Mississippi. And I'd heard all the stories about Mississippi, and they said, no, you're going to go work with a young group of girls called Girls and Pearls in Natchez, Mississippi. And I was there to teach them about art and history and heritage, and I knew that I had to take my daughter with me. So they connected me with a tour guide named Jeremy. And when I contacted him, he said, Hannah, you have to fly into Baton Rouge. You can't fly directly into Natchez. And it's going to take about an hour for you to drive from Baton Rouge to Natchez. And he said, when you drive here, do not drive through Jackson, Mississippi, because I cannot guarantee your safety. And my daughter and I were so scared. I remember clutching that steering wheel so hard. And you can see the asphalt turn to gravel. And it was like you were going back in time. And there were Confederate flags and plantation homes and cotton as far as your eyes could see. And I told Jeremy, I need to tour these plantation homes. I need to see them. And at the time, because I didn't know any better, I thought this is just part of history. This is like a museum. And he said, oh no, Hannah, people still live in those homes. You can't just walk into their homes. You have to pay for a tour. And I thought, well, that doesn't seem right. Like I should get a discount or something. Like my ancestors might have helped build that, but okay, I'll pay. And so we started paying to go on these tours, and the plantation homes are mansions. They are stunning. And they still had the original bedding and the china. And in one of the homes, there was this big grand piano, and my daughter was touching everything in the home. And I thought, what are you doing? I can't afford anything in this home. Don't touch any of this stuff. And so I asked her, why are you doing that? And she said, I wanted to touch things that I knew slaves wouldn't be able to touch. And on our final, what was the second to last home, I finally asked the tour guide, well, take me to the slave quarters. Show me that, because I wouldn't have been in this house. Take me where they would have been. And she said, oh no, I can't do that. We've turned all of those into offices. And I felt like once again, my history was just gone. So we went to another home, and this tour guide was Black, and the homes were just so beautiful. And on this table was the finest china, and I'll never forget, there was a casserole dish, and the handle on the dish was a solid gold cotton ball. And above this table, there was this huge fan. It's called a punka. And it had a string attached to it that went off into the corner. And he told me that a slave, oftentimes a little girl, would have to stand in the corner and pull the string so the fan would wave and keep flies off of the food. And I was so heartbroken that somebody was enslaved just to keep flies off of food. And he said, Hannah, don't weep for her, because she had a very important job. When people eat, they talk. And her job was to stand in that corner and listen to everything that was said around that table, and then go back and tell her mother everything that she heard. Because for them, information could have meant freedom. And finally, I knew that I had to go to the cotton fields. So I went to the Frogmore plantation. It's still a working plantation. They have 1,800 acres of cotton. And I asked the owner to show me the bags that slaves had to put cotton in. And in my mind, I never imagined the bag she would show me. It was 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. And I asked her how much cotton can fit in this bag, and she said 70 pounds. And slaves were required to pick 200 to 300 pounds a day. And she gave me the bag, and I could go out to the cotton fields, and I did, and I just started picking cotton. And it was so hot that day. And while I was picking cotton, I thought about Gorée Island, and I thought about Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. I thought about my daughter and her cries, and I thought about my mom in that cotton field. And I thought about all the stories that were just lost in those fields. And I thought about that little girl pulling the string and the fan and what the tour guide told me. And I knew that I still had something to say, and that my job was to go back and tell the story. Thank you.